situation. All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another OWASP Toronto chapter meetup. My name's Adam, and I'll be your host for this evening. With me is Yuck Fei, Manny, and Jack, who will be giving a presentation this evening. Jack will be presenting about OWASP Zap, and Manny will be talking about his charity. So both very exciting projects. But before we begin, we have a couple of housekeeping items. For starters, if you've never been to any of our streams before, we have a feedback link in the description of this chat. If you have any suggestions for future talks or any feedback for us to improve our stream, you can definitely let us know with that. Also, if you're looking for CPE credits, you can use that form and leave your name and email address so we know that you attended. Also, if there's any questions during the presentation, we'll be periodically taking breaks and reading the chat just to relay those questions to the presenters. If you're hiring or looking for work, leave that in the chat now. And I think that's it. So I will leave the floor to Manny. Good luck.
Thanks, Adam. Hey, everyone. So my talk's going to be media penetration test.
Sorry.
Okay. So I'm Manny, the founder and CEO of Hackers for Change, a registered nonprofit based out of Toronto. I'm also a cybersecurity consultant at Security Compass. I perform pen tests there against web apps, mobile apps, infrastructure, etc. I'm also just currently finishing up a master's in management at Queen's University. So before I talk a little bit about Hackers for Change, I want to talk a little bit about the inspiration and a little bit about how I got started in InfoSec. So I started learning basic offensive security concept techniques when I was around 14 years old. At the time, I ran a Gary's Mod server, and a rival game server had actually denial of service to my server, so it was offline. I ended up fleeing to hack forums, thanks Google, and a bunch of other communities to try to teach myself as much as I could. And as you can imagine, with all the stuff out there, there really wasn't a whole lot. I ended up meeting some great people in the forum who introduced me to some underground communities and forums on IRC and Tor. And after some time, I sort of went back to that rival server owner's website, found that he was using a nulled copy of some forum software, and ended up RMRFing his box. And that's kind of how I got started. But it kind of went crashing down. So the first shell I had popped on that kind of led down a dark path in a sense. So from 14 to 17, I sort of continued to feed my knowledge and supplement it with as much information as I could. Ended up hacking a bunch of different stuff, never made $1 off of it because that wasn't my reason for doing it. I was doing these things mostly out of curiosity. There wasn't exactly hack the box or try hack me when I was 13, 14. So there was really no place to train my skills ethically. And don't get me wrong, I wasn't an experienced hacker by any means when I was younger. Most of my attacks were just finding SQL injections, running them through SQL map, using public exploits, or resorting to social engineering. I stopped black hatting when I started post-secondary school, didn't give much thought of it after that. I ended up getting kicked out of university in my second year, enrolled for a 2-year diploma, and then to make things worse, I ended up getting arrested by the FBI the first semester of my diploma for all this stuff I did when I was a kid. So crashing down. But thankfully, since I was a kid and they sort of recognized where I was coming from, I was tried as a minor and all my charges were withdrawn after fulfilling some conditions. It's probably the most notable one being giving cybersecurity training to the RCMP, OPP, and some other law enforcement agencies. Once I was allowed to use the internet again, I joined a cybersecurity startup that was testing popular open source software and disclosing bugs ethically to the vendor. They were called Project and Security. We managed to disclose a few pretty cool bugs and managed to get some publications surrounding our work. Additionally, I did some bug bounty hunting and got a 6-month assistant instructor contract helping teach a cybersecurity bootcamp at UFT. I ended up leveraging all of the above to get my foot in the door with my current employer, well, at least thanks from this slide. So stepping back from me for a second, I want to take a look at some of the problems of the industry. So there's a growing rate of data collection among charities and a growing rate of cybersecurity attacks. Not-for-profits and charities can't always afford cybersecurity services, and usually they're not aware of the risks that exist in the space. When looking at the employability of the industry, there's expected to be 1.8 million unfilled security roles by the end of 2019. Yet it's difficult to break into the industry and relevant work experience opportunities are hard to come by. Additionally, out of the global cybersecurity workforce, women only represent 20% of it, people of color even less. We need to do better. Despite having all the experience I did, I only got a call back from one company, Security Compass. This is where part of the inspiration for Hackers for Change comes from. So how are we helping to solve these issues? First, by providing free cybersecurity services. So as mentioned, charities and nonprofits are often the most vulnerable targets of cyber attacks. Multiple studies have shown that cyber attacks against charities and nonprofits have increased over the past few years exponentially. For most charities and nonprofits, this looks like us doing an external web-facing assessment with time allocated for account configuration review for their cloud apps like G Suite. Second, we provide industry quality work experience to our volunteers. Our junior consultants get the chance to hone their penetration testing skills on real environments. So how does an engagement work as a junior consultant? You would get put on a team with a few other juniors, and that team will be headed by a senior resource. Using our in-house methodologies, checklists, and wiki, junior consultants will get a chance to perform a guided penetration test from enumeration to reporting on charities and nonprofits that work with us. Our senior consultants get the chance to share their experience and volunteer their time, as well as be exposed to the managerial side of consulting. This includes helping scope projects, writing statements of works, leading engagements, etc. Third, and definitely not least, champion for marginalized groups. Cybersecurity is a welcoming industry. However, there is still an underrepresentation of women and people of color in the industry. By forming strategic partnerships with groups that represent women, veterans, and people of color in cybersecurity, we can help ensure that the next generation of talent is diverse. So, for volunteers, how do you volunteer? We have a 5-step process. The first step involves going online to our website, hackersforchange.com, and filling out our intake form online. We collect some basic information such as your education, your experience, and some references. If the references check out, an HFC representative will invite you to set up a time to interview with one of our senior consultants. Provided the interview goes well, we will ask you to submit a background check. As you would be working with client data, we need to make sure that anyone staffed on these engagements does not pose a risk of leaking data. Finally, upon submission of a criminal background check, an HFC representative will reach out with an agreement to sign. Once signed, you would begin the onboarding process. So although junior and senior consultants do two very different things in our organization, the 5-step process is the same. So for charities, so very similar to the previous one, just some additional stuff around there. So we start off with some basic paperwork. We have an intake form on our website that collects some basic IT information about your not-for-profit or charity. Upon submission, someone from our team will review the form and may follow up to get additional details on your environment. From here, a senior consultant or a director would draft a master services agreement and statement of work that will be sent to the charity or NFP to sign. Upon signing, we will form and assign a team internally to your organization. We begin project execution according to the timelines in the statement of work. Upon completion of the engagement, we submit a report outlining our findings with remediation steps, in addition to offering a read-up call. A read-up call gives the charity or NFP a chance to sit down with the senior consultant who headed the engagement and be able to walk through the report with them. So in addition to the consulting side, we do a couple of other cool things that our volunteers can get involved with. We do collaborative vulnerability research for the ones of us that are allowed to against popular open source applications and ethically disclose vulnerabilities to the vendor. Some notable ones that we disclosed earlier this year were on KDE and Maltego. Additionally, we are also in the process of building out e-learning curriculum right now to create a cybersecurity program for high school students to raise awareness of the industry. All our volunteers are able to sort of come on board on this project and help facilitate the course. So what is our vision and the purpose behind starting all this? So our goal is to be Canada's cybersecurity leader for charities, while inspiring and empowering today's youth to pursue a career in the cybersecurity field. In an increasingly connected and digitized world, no business is safe from cyber attacks. At Hackers for Change, our mission is to educate and enable charities to protect their computer and information systems, allowing them to focus on maximizing their social impact. Now, that being said, I just wanted to go over some additional resources that you could use to also sort of help you become a pen tester and build those skills. So the first and probably the most valuable of them is the Portswigger's Web Security Academy. So they provide a bunch of in-depth explanation and labs of common web application vulnerabilities, beginner to advanced. VulnHub is a collection of vulnerable virtual machines with write-ups that you can spin up locally and just practice hacking on them. Try Hack Me has a number of paths for beginners and intermediate levels. Hack the Box, probably the most known, offers a rotating monthly showcase of vulnerable machines. Retired Machines have public solutions. A great YouTuber, his name is IPSEC, IPPSEC. He has a great playlist on YouTube where he showcases himself doing the retired machines in as many different ways as possible. And oftentimes it can help build a methodology for your own penetration testing just by watching him work. And finally, Over the Wire. It's a collection of war games to help foster understanding of security concepts. In particular, they have a war game called Bandit, which is perfect for practicing buffer overflows. And yeah, that is the end of my presentation, and I'm just going to take any questions. I saw Stinky Dinky asked, do you need previous experience to be a volunteer? So our junior consultants have a baseline understanding of basic cybersecurity concepts, virtualization, and Linux. So as long as you spin up a VM, not be totally lost using the terminal, you should be good to sort of join on as a junior consultant. Our senior consultants are more experienced and have worked in the industry for a bit longer. So we do require some experience for our senior roles, but our junior roles are definitely more geared towards people that want to break into the industry.
Awesome, thanks, Manny. Is there any other questions in the chat there for Manny?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess just ending off then, if there are no additional questions, the one thing that I just want to mention is what we're looking for right now is more charities and nonprofits to work with. So if you are in the crowd right now, you sit on the board of a charity, you have a friend that owns a charity or a nonprofit, and you feel they could benefit from our cybersecurity services, please send them to hackersforchange.com. We would be able to help them out. Additionally, we're also looking to form partnerships with any groups in the cybersecurity community that help underrepresented folk break into the industry. And Ryan, how many people work for you? So nobody, like there are no employees at Hackers for Change. It's all volunteer based. Currently, we have about 40 volunteers. And that's a mix between like the leadership side and the consulting side. And 100%, Joseph, you could definitely contribute while having a day job. A lot of the people that work on our team actually do have day jobs, and we just kind of do this on the side. So the 100%, that's not an issue. So the volunteers, so think of it as like almost like a bench, right? So let's say we have 15 junior consultants and we get a engagement that we're going to staff, right? So based on the scope, we'll say, okay, this looks like it can be completed by 4 junior consultants and 1 senior. From there, we would begin staffing the project internally. So the biggest thing when it comes to how many volunteers do you have, it really just depends on the engagement. And that being said, you will always get the chance to work with different teams and different individuals. And then another question from Ryan, how do you go about looking for new clients? So right now, it's been like a lot of cold calling. You'd think that selling free cybersecurity to charities and nonprofits is easy, but it actually asks a lot more questions than solutions. Thankfully, we're not facing the issue as much anymore because we formed a couple of great relationships with some community partners that sort of co-sign us in a sense. So we haven't had that issue as much recently, but right now it's just mostly us reaching out to charities or nonprofits and referrals. So from Tabira, how many hours do you expect from junior/senior volunteers who sign up? So it honestly just depends. If there's no engagement going on, then there's really nothing for the junior consultants to do during that week. From the senior standpoint, if there is no engagement that they're leading, they are welcome to help contribute towards our internal wiki, any of our sort of internal methodologies or checklists, or maybe helping work on some other stuff like the e-learning side of things. So in terms of how many hours, it really just depends. So if we'll usually post in like the consulting Slack, we'll be like, hey, we have a project coming up at the end of January. We need 4 sort of volunteers who's interested, and then then you can sort of understand based on your schedule and your timing. You can say, okay, well, I have some free time end of January, and then we can work the hours up around then. But typically during an active engagement, junior consultants usually work between 5 to 10 hours a week. Seniors around the same when there's an engagement.
Okay, I've got a question for you, Manny. You kind of alluded to it in your presentation, but are you strictly web applications, or do you also do like mobile apps, like networks as well? Like what kind of like cybersecurity services do you offer?
Sure, it's a great question, Adam. So right now we're doing web app stuff and just mostly a lot of account review. That being said, we're definitely open to doing mobile and infrastructure. We just found that in the charity space, it's not as common to get those types of engagements. But that being said, we're really about working with the charities and nonprofits we work with and sort of addressing their security needs on that scoping call. So if we were to have a call and they're like, oh, hey, we have this mobile app that we'd love to get tested, then we would be able to provide that.
Okay, awesome. Anything else from the chat, or Jack and Yuck Fan? Any questions from you?
Not for me. This is great.
Yeah, me neither. Thanks very much, Manny.
All right. Well, if you guys do have additional questions, please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or LinkedIn, Instagram. My messages are open, and I will get back to you whenever I can. If you are interested in volunteering, just head over to hackersforchange.com, fill out the volunteer form, and hopefully we will get the chance to work alongside each other.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Manny. All right, everybody. I guess we'll give it a couple minutes break. I guess we'll give 10-minute break, and we'll be back here about 7 o'clock for Jack's presentation. Ready, Jack?
Always.
All right. Well, welcome back, everybody. For our next presentation, we have our very own Jack presenting about OWASP Zap. Jack, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thanks, Adam. Hi, everyone. I'm Jack Enders. I'm a security consultant at Security Compass and one of the volunteers who helps out with the OWASP Toronto chapter. I'm also, as it happens, a very big fan of one of OWASP's flagship projects called OWASP Zap, and that's basically what my talk is going to be about today. So essentially this talk is going to be a sales pitch for Zap and why, if you haven't looked at it, you definitely should. And then kind of just some hands-on stepping through some of Zap's common features, how to get started, familiarize yourself with kind of the major components of the user interface. So yeah, that's what we're going to be doing today. So first, what is OWASP? What is Zap? So the Zap attack proxy is an OWASP flagship project, and the way that OWASP categorizes its projects are basically for breakers, builders, developers. This is kind of how they classify people in the application security space. I'm going to focus on these two elements just because that's what I know the most about. So for breakers like pen testers, application security reviewers, Zap is a fully featured HTTP proxy, which with shockingly good feature parity with commercial projects like Burp and Charles. If you're familiar with Burp, I'm going to be referencing that functionality a lot just because I think it's probably the most common web application proxy out there. Or at least the most popular within the InfoSec community. So just before I get any further in, and I should have mentioned this before, I've tried to make this talk accessible for anybody with kind of basic knowledge of networking. You definitely do not need any security expertise or anything to hopefully take something away from this talk. Oh, sorry, this was this is a question for Hackers for Change, but I'm just going to put that out there before we get any further. Yeah, so Zap also has a ton of community-driven plugins and a great scripting interface, which is much less difficult to use than you would expect. For builders, it's a web application scanner, is how the Zap team refers to it, which is kind of very analogous to a DAS. That's focused on discovering vulnerabilities present in running applications. It also lays claim to the most popular web application scanner. In a blog post released on April 2nd, 2020, the Zap team said that they had 85,000 downloads and over 220,000 Docker image pulls. And yeah, on the scanning side, it also has a very strong feature set, even compared to commercial offerings like the aforementioned Burp Suite. The community has also done a really, really good job of making Zap pretty easy to deploy no matter what you're trying to get out of it. We'll get into details in that in a little bit, but basically you can deploy Zap just as a jar or as a Docker container. And yeah, for Zap does lack some of the plug and play capabilities that commercial tools have, but I think it more than makes up for that in great community support and the ability to customize and integrate it with other tools. So Ali asked, is this like Burp Suite? In a lot of ways, Zap is very, very much like Burp Suite, but it doesn't cost any money. And as I'll show you, has some interesting capabilities that while you can do them in Burp Suite, are a lot easier in Zap. I'm gonna butcher this name, but Giuseppe asked, do you need to come from security background in order to become, oh, again, sorry, wrong. He retracted the message, so I'll leave that. Okay, cool. So just giving you a quick overview of Zap, the open source project. It's an OWASP flagship project, which means that OWASP has decided that Zap has demonstrated strategic value to both OWASP and the application security community as a whole. So basically it means that people actually use and rely on it, and so they'll designate some funding to help out the Zap crew. It's free and open source under the Apache 2 license, which means you can pretty much do whatever you want with it, including use it for commercial purposes, as long as you include the Zap copyright license and note any changes that you've made to it, and you don't try to hold the Zap team liable or use their trademark. Obviously, do your own research on this before trying to mess around with copyright law. Zap is also enduring. This is like a project that's been around for more than a decade. The very first Zap release was on September 6, 2010, and it was originally a fork of another web proxy called Peros. It's also one of the most active OWASP projects as of 2014, and based on their GitHub activity today, I would still say it's an extremely active project. One of the things that I personally really appreciate about it, Zap, is that it's an awesome community. The leadership team, which I've listed on the slides, are all longtime OWASP members and like active InfoSec professionals. They all actively contribute to Zap, and they do a lot of the community outreach themselves as well, which I think is very cool and underappreciated. In addition, the Zap project as a whole has great public communications. The GitHub community, as I said, is like very active, very friendly, and constructive. So if you're interested at all in contributing to them, they make it very easy and pleasant experience. And yeah, they also do stuff like take advantage of Google Summer of Code and Season of Docs to do their best to continuously be improving the project and adding features. So the question looks like it got reposted, and it from Giuseppe, again, I'm so sorry about butchering your name, asked, with a shift to work from home, would you suggest using Zap for your home network or building out a server/cloud to perform external scans? If you're running web applications on your local network and you're interested in finding out if they have kind of some common misconfigurations, or just kind of interested in learning a little bit about web application scanning and maybe just want to dip your toe in, I think Zap is great for this. Huge benefit over other options is that it's absolutely free. It's very easy to deploy. And if you do have questions, the community is super friendly. There are tons of issues on GitHub where people are just having setup problems or whatever. And the community is really receptive to kind of trying to help you out with that. The docs are also extensive and really well written. So yeah, if you're doing it for your own interests, I would say definitely a great option to do some application security scanning. Yeah, hopefully that answers your question. But yeah, and for everyone else, I am keeping an eye on the YouTube chat. So if you have any other questions, I'll answer them as we go here. So now we're going to get into the more hands-on portion of the presentation, I guess. So first thing we're going to do is talk about how to go about setting up Zap. Adam, I think we talked about, yeah, perfect, you got it. I just want everybody to be able to see kind of screen share, that kind of stuff. So first of all, just in case you're new to the idea of like a web application proxy, manually inspecting web application traffic, I've just made up this quick diagram for you here. So basically, if you as a user are using your browser, say Google Chrome, you'll configure it to connect to Zap, your proxy, and you're going to also configure it to trust a Zap issued certificate and identify websites, web applications, however you want to call them. And then when you make a request to say, send a tweet, your browser is going to create that request, toss it to Zap. You can manipulate the request in Zap. You'll be able to see it. And then Zap is going to make a connection to Twitter. It's going to deal with the TLS transport layer security connection to Twitter, deal with the Twitter issued SSL certificate, send whatever tweet you wanted to send, plus whatever modifications you wanted to make to that request, and then do the whole process in reverse when Twitter sends back some data. So just in case you're not familiar with the web app proxy, hopefully you have a high-level understanding now. So first thing we're going to do is get started with intercepting traffic. So if you go into the Zap interface, head into settings, dynamic SSL certificate tab, you'll be able to generate it here just by tapping on the generate button. You'll save a .cer file, which we can then toss over to our browser. So in this case, we're going to hop into the settings for Firefox, set our certificate to be trusted, hop into the proxy settings, and configure Firefox to proxy to Zap, which is running locally on port 6969. Cool. So now, once we've done that, we can head over to twitter.com, and we'll be able to see this traffic in Zap. Cool. So here's all the traffic from Firefox that Zap has ever witnessed. And yeah, you can see on the bottom, we can see the individual requests to Twitter. We can see that we've logged in, stuff has happened. We can also, if you're visiting more than one websites, which you commonly might be, you can use some regex rules to filter the traffic that you're seeing, stuff like that. You'll notice on the columns on the right, Zap is already doing some passive scanning, which we're going to get into why that's interesting in a little bit. But yeah, they're flagging security issues that it's noticed just by kind of witnessing the traffic that you sent to twitter.com. Cool. So we'll head back to Twitter. So one of the cool things about Zap, sorry, I forgot to mention it, is that if all of this seemed like a bunch of work to you, generating a certificate, installing it on your browser, setting up your browser to proxy traffic through OWASP Zap, Zap also actually has a pretty cool feature where you can just press this button on the top right here, and you'll open a pre-configured instance of Firefox, or if you prefer Chrome, and it will just, everything's pre-configured. It's already going to trust your Zap SSL certificate, and you'll be able to see traffic immediately. Yeah. I do apologize. These GIFs, however you want to say it, are starting slightly out of order from where I was expecting. So hoping that's going to resolve itself in a moment here. But yeah, so yeah, this is kind of the very, very basics of how you can inspect application traffic with Zap, and kind of the very first steps to getting started. So, sorry, I'm just gonna wait a moment here. Yeah, here we go. So next, we're going to hop into Zap, understanding Zap application layout. Sorry, I'm just gonna pause for a minute here and let this GIF restart so I can hopefully explain it a little bit better. I do apologize. Okay, cool. So basically, Zap has a bunch of interface customization options. As you just saw, obviously, first thing to do is enable dark mode. There's a bunch of options kind of to your taste. I think that this is only a feature of the weekly Zap release currently, and it will get merged into the stable release a little bit later. You just restart Zap, and suddenly it looks much nicer. Next thing, you will probably want to disable the Quick Start tab from showing up every time, since those features are very easy to access. And now you kind of can inspect requests and responses in detail. At the top there, you can choose how they show up, whether they're on top or on the bottom of each other. This view that you're seeing right now is kind of nice in terms of being able to grab nice screenshots and stuff if you're gonna, for example, create a report. Yeah. So next thing we're gonna do is common manual testing tasks. So yeah, let's hop into this. So as I mentioned earlier, when you're browsing, targeting an application, you'll often see a bunch of websites. You probably want to mark the ones that you're actually interested in targeting, or if you're, for example, working for Hackers for Change and you've only been authorized to test a charity's website, you definitely want to specify which websites, which domains are actually in scope for you. So Zap calls this context. You can do it by right-clicking on any domain that Zap has seen, as you just saw, and adding it to the default context. Once it's been added to the default context, it's pretty cool. You can now basically in any of Zap's panels filter so you only see in-scope applications. Burp's terminology for this is scope, which is a little bit more clear. But with Zap, you can also create other contexts if you want to, say, divide out by API or something like that. So now that our application's targeted, we might be interested in intercepting requests. So for example, say on this login page, there is some client-side controls preventing you from injecting anything interesting into the email field. We can press the little red circle at the top here. And then whenever we send a request, say by pressing the login button, we'll see it in this panel in a break tab, which automatically appears whenever a request is sent, and we'll be able to easily modify it. While I'm just waiting for this to loop back around, I think there was a question, from the previous slide, is this like adding to a scope? Yeah, this is exactly like adding something to scope and only dealing with what's in scope. So when we're intercepting traffic, we can modify it before we pass it back along to the application. If you think back to our diagram, Zap's interface for this is actually very cool, and I think significantly better than Burp's, in that you can either step through individual requests using this button here, or if you just wanted to intercept a particular request, you can step, and then when you modify and send the request you want, you can just press this button and it'll automatically disable interception. Before I move on, there's a question, is it legal to do this on a live website? This website is specifically set up with the intention that it will be tampered with. Do your own research on what is or is not legal in your jurisdiction. I'm extremely unqualified to give you that advice, but the answer in general, if you don't have permission from a website owner, is probably that no, it is not legal. But yeah, as I said, do your own research, make your own decisions. Cool. So we'll move on here. Another interesting feature of Zap is the ability to add breakpoints. So basically this is, you can filter all incoming requests and automatically intercept them while letting all the other requests go through. So as you just saw there, I added a breakpoint for this login path. And yeah, when I sent a login request without enabling interception, the login request and response was intercepted by Zap, and I'm off to the races and can continue my testing unintruded, and that will continue happening for as long as this breakpoint is active. Any other questions? Cool. So moving on. Now we'll go on to repeating a request. You can see that I've detailed this basically exactly after the burp functionality. This is super easy. From any request panel, you just right click, open in the manual request editor. I absolutely love that it opens a new window every time you do this. And now you can edit this request as many times as you want and resend it. So for example here, I was just trying to show that you're issued a different JWT every time you log into the application. So let's see it again. You right click, open resend with /resend with request editor, and yeah, you're off to the races. You can just simply resend. You can edit anything in this field and see how the web application reacts in this field. So yeah, now let's say you want to send a bunch of requests. In burp, this would be their intruder functionality. So you right click, select fuzz, and now we want to define what Zap calls fields. So you can see I'm highlighting the email host body parameter, and I'm going to add the things that I basically want to see how the web application reacts to when they're in that post body parameter. So I tried basically a bunch of very common usernames with the OWASP Juice Shop domain. So now you can see the application is going to send all of these requests really quickly. It opens up the new fuzzer tab automatically. You can monitor a bunch of different fuzzers concurrently and see what the results are. And oh, look, the last username that I picked happens to be the correct one, and we were able to log into the application. So now let's say you find some data that you're having a hard time reading yourself. You might want to decode it, or maybe you find some data that you want to communicate in a way that an application can understand. Zap has a really cool interface for this. It's called encode decode hash. And it basically lets you perform a bunch of operations on any string that you put in this top box concurrently. So yeah, we're going to go again. You can just right click, send any data you want to the encode decode hash interface, and you can see, oh, look, that string that I selected was valid base 64. So now we can read part of the JWT payload. Yeah, I think the fact that Zap does this with a bunch of different things at the same time, and you can kind of just judge whether that's useful to you, is again a much better interface than burp. But as I was pretty clear about at the beginning, I'm definitely a fanboy. So yeah, now let's say we wanted to decode some data that Zap doesn't know how to decode. So if we give it the whole JWT, it's not able to decode it because it's not a valid base 64. If we head over to the script tab, we can actually create an encode decode script. So in this case, basically what I'm going to do is split up this JWT, grab the first field, which is the signature and indicates kind of how the JWT is signed. We're going to enable the script, and I've just copy pasted some data. You can use a variety of languages to do this. I believe Python, JavaScript, and Java are all supported out of the box. I chose to do it in JavaScript. But yeah, so basically you see we split up the token on period, and now we can add this decode JWT header or decode JWT script to the encode decode interface. And oh, look at that. Now we can kind of see the human readable version of the JWT header. Cool, so that was pretty sweet. Why don't we get into scripting with Zap? Zap has a bunch of different scripts. This is not even all of them, but the ones we're going to go through today are HTTP sender scripts, active and passive scan rule scripts, and extender scripts, which are absolutely amazing. To do this same functionality in Burp, if say your client is doing some, if say you're looking at an application where there's some client-side encryption happening and you want to decrypt that when it gets sent to the proxy and examine it before re-encrypting it and sending it to the server, Zap scripts make this extremely straightforward to do, unlike Burp, which makes you write an entire plugin to do so. To do something of that level of complexity. So let's get into it. HTTP sender scripts are kind of the most basic level of script. Basically, these scripts are applied to any request that is sent or received by Zap. And you can obviously selectively apply these scripts as well. But this includes any traffic that Zap generates through the fuzzing interface, through the repeater interface, anything like that. So basically what we're going to do is create a script that adds a header OWASP Zap as your new favorite proxy to every single request. So we created the script, enabled it. You can see it's, again, JavaScript. It's like fairly straightforward to access a request property. And then when we refresh the page with the script enabled, we see that our new proxy, or our new header, is there. So I'm just going to show you this again with the JavaScript script. And if you're intimidated at all by this scripting aspect, at the end of the presentation, I'll show a GitHub repo with a bunch of really great examples, which is what I stole most of these from. But yeah, so you can basically say for any request, grab the header and add a new header with this content. And it's just a couple of strings, and yeah. Okay, so that's HTTP sender scripts. I feel like fairly straightforward premise. So extender scripts are a lot more interesting. Basically what they allow you to do is take and read or write any data that Zap has access to and manipulate it however you want. I'm going to do this in Python just because this one is slightly more interesting. This template, sorry, is slightly more interesting. So what I'm going to do here is prompt the user for some data. And yes, this is just like a standard Java, I believe it's the Sway GUI library, Python implementation of it. So you could make like very, very complex user interfaces. So in this case, I'm going to prompt them for string. I'm going to ask them what's the best proxy around. And obviously, you know it's Zap. I submit this string. There's a little debugging string to show that it's actually been submitted. And now, in another separate script, I can go and read that value that I've just prompted the user for. And yeah, it's like very straightforward to access. It's just this standard format. You grab your global vars. You can also just set script-specific vars if you don't want to expose data as much. And we grab the input one tag. And yeah, from the script that we sent earlier. So now our user agent is, you know, it's Zap. Yeah, so extender scripts, extremely powerful. I'm not a particularly good programmer, so I didn't make a super complicated user interface, but hopefully this gives you an idea of what you can do with this baked in Zap scripting functionality. Great. So now we're going to do custom scan rules, which are also extremely cool. So we're just going to do a passive scan rule because it's a little bit more straightforward to understand. This is, again, going to be in JavaScript. So basically, this script is going to try to find email addresses in the requests that Zap witnesses. This is completely stolen from one of the Zap team leads, so no credit to me. Basically, you can see it's just this regex string here. It's going to exclude any requests that are like images or binary, just to make processing a little bit easier. Then we take the message body, check whether it's one of those types that we're not interested in, and then apply the regex to it. And then if the regex triggers on anything, we do this Zap JavaScript function to raise an alert. So we'll enable the script. hop into the alerts panel and see if our script found anything. And oh, would you look at that? Our email addresses script fired, and we displayed the email addresses that we found. So scan rules can obviously be much more complicated than that. Zap active scan rules allow you to do things like create individual requests, do analysis, or like modify those requests, send them back, compare the results, that kind of thing. Anything that you could imagine doing in JavaScript or Python to manipulate and analyze requests, you can basically do with these passive and active rules. The Mozilla team has also developed another type of script called Zest scripts, which basically allow you to do even more complex tasks based on requests that you already witnessed. Really kicking myself for not including them because they are extremely cool, but I just didn't want this to run over time. So maybe a future talk. But yeah, if this is like intriguing to you at all, definitely look into Zest scripts as well. So another thing that Zap can do is deal with callback traffic. So if anybody's familiar with Burp, I think this feature is like Burp Collaborator. Basically, if you send some data to, again, we'll just say Twitter, and that data gets processed somewhere that doesn't necessarily reflect anything back to the client side or that you don't have any visibility into, but is from a server that has access to the internet, setting up a payload that will do like a DNS lookup or send data back to another external service on the internet is super useful. So if you're interested in identifying, say, like server-side request forgery, this is like an essential feature to have. I don't know that many people who are into pen testing realize this, but it's like this is like fairly straightforward to set up with Zap. So in this case, you have your target application server, your server that you control, and then you sitting on your laptop in a poorly selected icon back at home. And basically, you want to monitor for traffic from the target application to your publicly facing server and then have that show up in Zap. So to do this, back in the Zap settings, we have a callback address section. You basically set up a remote address, select a port, and it'll give you a test URL that you can visit. This is what the whole presentation was like up until a few days ago, and I decided that having just screenshots was too boring. But yeah, I didn't get a chance to do a nice GIF/GIF about it. So then once you have this configured in Zap, you can head over to, if you're stuck on a sad Windows box like me, PuTTY, or if you have a Unix system, you can just do this with SSH. But basically, this is just super straightforward port forwarding. Basically, you're going to say any traffic that gets sent to our test server's port 6969, send that back to our local port 6969, which is what Zap is running on. So you can do this, you open an SSH connection, and then all of a sudden you'll be able to unlock basically a whole new class of alerts that Zap has around like SSRF, stuff like that. Cool. So now we're going to get into deploying Zap as a scanner. So there are a few options for deploying Zap. As I kind of mentioned at the beginning of this talk, you can just deploy it as a Java binary. It has an extremely fully featured just regular HTTP API, which we'll get into in a second. So it works really well on, say, like a headless server or in a Docker container. So yeah, it's perfect if you have like a CI/CD pipeline, you want to apply some basic security scans to it, and you don't want to mess around too much with configuration files. It's very easy to do that with Zap just by like making some HTTP request with curl or Python or whatever your language of choice is. So from the Zap page, the HTTP API itself allows you to do a ton of stuff. You can read any alerts that Zap has discovered, write new alerts, initiate, stop, manage scans, update Zap, spider applications, which is like discover new pages and applications, manage any HTTP sessions, manage your proxies, create, view any custom rules and all the regular rules that are selected, and enable and disable any of those. It also has some really, really cool functionality that basically within the Zap GUI allows you to like show it what an authentication flow is and then save that authentication flow as a flat file. And then you're able to access that authentication flow from the HTTP API. So say you're developing an application that has a bunch of functionality that's only accessible when you as a user have authenticated. Zap basically facilitates letting you access and do security testing against that functionality, all just by like making HTTP requests. Looking at it now, this screenshot is extremely small, but if you can hopefully see it, the Zap documentation site basically shows you exactly how to invoke most of the API features just using like curl, Java, Python, whatever you're into. And one of the really, really cool things about the Zap project is they actually have an officially supported Python library, which makes it very, very easy to script like fairly complex stuff. And some other community members have even gone out of their way to take that Python library a step further, interface with the command line interface of Zap, and pull off some advanced features. There is a question, are there a set of rules / scripts for testing against GDPR and compliance or other standards, for example? So GDPR compliance, I'm fairly confident the answer is no. That's not really inside of Zap's wheelhouse. But all of the alerts within Zap, I believe they are all mapped to OWASP Top 10 and ASVS. On the next page, I'm going to show what an example output of a Zap scan looks like, and hopefully that'll answer your question. But if it doesn't, just let me know, and I can look into that a little bit more and update these slides with an answer for you. Because yeah, that's obviously anytime you can map against like a set of known standards, that can be super useful. Cool. So if we hop into GitHub Actions, Zap actually has an official GitHub action. So in about 30 seconds here, we're going to deploy Zap as part of GitHub Action that gets run every time a new commit happens on this repo. So basically, you look up the action, copy it into your YAML configuration. There are a few parameters that you have to modify, which I'm going to skip over doing. And then you commit your YAML file to your repo, and even this commit alone is going to trigger the CI, so this action will run. We're just scanning that site from before the OWASP Juice shop, which, if you're not familiar, is a intentionally vulnerable application that's very easy to set up, and you can kind of practice against. So yeah, as you can see, passed a bunch of the baseline Zap checks, but we did fail a few here. So this is just the GitHub action log itself. What the action also does is open a new GitHub issue, basically summarizing all of the problems that it found. And it created a binary with the results of the scan in a bunch of different formats, JSON for machines and Markdown and HTML for people. So we can hop into the HTML report. And yeah, you can see the issues it found, detailed the problems, exactly where they were, and provide some documentation on figuring that out. Cool. So Wrapping things up, if you got here late or kind of wanted a slightly more honest summary on Zap, I think the good things about it are that it's open source, costs $0. It's very easy if you're just curious and you want to play around. It's also very, very fully featured, all things considered. There's nothing that I would typically do in Burp that would be impossible to do in Zap, but we'll get to that in a second. It also has top-notch customization. As I kind of showed you earlier, the scripting. I keep Zap installed on my work laptop just for the occasional instance where it's much, much easier to do tampering of a bunch of requests in an automated fashion, where in Burp that can be very, very painful. But who knows, maybe I'm just a bad Burp user. And yeah, it has a really great community that I think if you're interested at all in it, in getting started into kind of the application testing or scanning world, is a really good touchstone to have. The places where I think Zap does fall down a little bit are the user interface is not the most intuitive. I showed a couple small adjustments that you can do to make it a little bit nicer, but the reality is I think the layout and the way that it handles some things really frustrates people, which fair enough. I think the biggest place where Zap falls down, though, is in that as much as the scripting capability is very good, as much as the community is great at creating free plugins, a lot of the time there will be a really nice, really fully thought out Burp plugin that does exactly what you want it to do and takes like 10 seconds to install, versus while you could do exactly the same thing in Zap, the reality is you'll probably have to create a custom script or create a script that modifies some plugin behavior, some combination thereof. And so it's just a little bit less plug and play. I think that applies to the scanning side as well, but I'm a little bit less experienced in that in terms of like deploying it to like a CI/CD pipeline. And then also kind of in the same vein, it does occasionally take longer to get new features or support for new things. So gonna answer a couple questions. Michael asked, can Zap scan custom or proprietary protocols? Can it scan over other protocols like WebSocket? So the answer is yes, absolutely. It actually supports WebSocket out of the box. In terms of proprietary protocols, there's a little bit of more setup required. What I would recommend, and having done this in the past quite a bit, there's an open source tool called MITM, as in like man in the middle proxy. And it will basically take whatever protocol you want and convert it into something that an HTTP proxy like Zap can understand. And then once that data is inside of Zap, it's very, very easy to manipulate it using like the Zap scripting interface that I've kind of shown here. So I would say out of the box, proprietary protocols, not so much, but it's definitely very well suited to it, certainly more so than something like Burp or Charles Proxy. And if you kind of want a nice user interface to like manually explore stuff, I would say it's a pretty good fit for that. And then Michael also asked, what would you recommend for further training on this tool? Perhaps a commercial training vendor or other resources? I'm not super up to date on what commercial training is available, but at the end of this presentation, I actually provide a bunch of links to Zap's training that they've created. They've made some like really nicely produced training videos that kind of take a deep dive into all the features that I've shown here. And I think after watching that, you would certainly be able to start using Zap in day-to-day life and for like most common pen testing tasks, if that's already a skill set you have. Again, I'm gonna apologize if I butcher any names. Arjun asked, does Zap have any limitations being open source, like Burp's Community Edition, where the intruder speed is throttled? Arjun, so glad you asked. absolutely zero limitations. The free version of Zap is the complete version of Zap. You can do anything you want and more. So yeah, no limitations because it's free. There is only a free version. There's no commercial version. One of the many benefits of OWASP being a nonprofit and supporting projects like this. If you appreciate projects like this, do please consider joining OWASP. The membership fee is very reasonable, and you get a sick OWASP.org email. Ali asked, what OS is Zap available on? And was immediately answered correctly that it's available on Windows, Mac, Linux, basically anything where you can get a JRE, Zap will run on. Okay, awesome. So that's my spiel here. As I mentioned, there's a bunch of Zap resources. The Zap IRC channel is absolutely awesome and pretty active. Yeah, so I think that hopefully if you kind of came away from this talk excited about Zap, as I hope you all will be, and wanting to know more, then yeah, you can kind of go here to get your fix. My contact info is also here. Please feel free to reach out anytime. I'm always happy to answer questions about OWASP, Zap. If you want to give a talk at OWASP, I'm also the person to talk to, so do please reach out. And yeah, I think that's everything. If there aren't any...
Jack, I have a question.
Yeah, sure, Jake Faye.
Have you used the access control testing add-on in Zap? And if you have, how does it compare to Authorize in Burp?
First of all, if you're not using AuthZ and Burp for this task, you're missing out. But no, sadly, I haven't used the AuthZ plugin in Burp or in Zap firsthand. But I would imagine the functionality is like fairly similar. Zap also actually does have some of its own built-in authorization matrix type functionality, which is also available from the HTTP API, as we discussed. And yeah, it's pretty good. I would say that specifically is extremely comparable to AuthZ. But yeah, again, sorry, I'm not like super familiar with Authorize just because yeah, I don't use it that much. Yeah. Cool. I'll give it like another 30 seconds for any other questions. But yeah. All right, cool. Thanks very much, everyone. Yeah, thanks very much, everyone. Thank you, Adam, for posting the plugin. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this talk and either took something away from it or were at least entertained. Cheers.
Actually, sorry, Jack. I got a question for you.
Sure.
Do you think a professional like web application penetration tester like yourself could like use OWASP Zap completely like over Burp Pro? Like is it that good or is it that usable?
Yeah, 100%. I think, like I said, the real limitation that stops me from using Zap exclusively is really that factor of like, oh, I have 5 days to complete this assessment and I need to get this thing done. Do I really want to spend like half an hour scripting something versus just like grabbing the Burp plugin that already does it perfectly and covers all the weird edge cases? I think that's really the major limitation for Zap.
I gotcha. Okay, that's good to know. I mean, because if you're doing your OSCP, I guess, or OSWE, you can't use Burp Pro, so this might be a good alternative for you or anybody else who's listening in to use.
Yeah. There's also a question asking about feature comparison between Zap and Burp. I have not done that explicitly, but I am 100% confident that there are some videos and blog posts that do that. having kind of been playing around with Zap for the last little while, I would say that there aren't any major features missing from Burp. The performance in terms of doing stuff like fuzzing is occasionally does bog down if you're trying to do like some really huge like intruder equivalent scan. And you do also miss out on like the commercial support offered by Burp. But just off the top of my head, those would be the only two things that stand out. I will go and update my second to last slide here and see if I can find a video that I agree with and add it to there for you. And a link to these slides will be made available on the OWASP meetup page and our OWASP Toronto website. Cool.
Yeah. Are there any questions from the chat? All right, I guess not. Well, thank you, Jack, for your presentation, and thank you, everybody in the audience, for coming out to another OWASP Toronto event. Big thanks to our sponsors, HP, Checkmarx, Security Compass, Sonatype, Security Innovation, Amazon, and Shopify. Before I forget, if you have any feedback or are looking for CPE credits, please use the feedback form in the description of this video. Take care, everybody, and we will see you next month. See ya.